So what is now a firewall manager? A firewall manager is now basically like a manager. Firewall is one of the things that you can. So what a manager does is just like an organization wide, like it's more or less like a manager for you to manage everything related to security, right? A lot of, not really everything, but a lot of the things that are related to security, right? Supported services are the things that I've mentioned there. So AWS WAF, right? Web application firewall, your shield, your security groups, your network ACL, and even your DNS firewall. The point is that you can actually have a manager where you have like a place you are doing all these things, right? So more or less like um, you can have like policies that you set in the manager that is basically, but this is not going to work unless you are using like AWS organization, right? Because the whole idea is that you can actually have a policy that if you can create it like at a management level and say that if there is like a cloud front distribution in any of these accounts, please apply this policy to it, right? So it's more or less like, think about it. We've talked about security, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're dealing with scale, it's going to be hard for you to deal with each service like this, right? And that's why somebody who is like security, trust me, you can't do that as part of your job, but sometimes in an organization, there's like a security arm that is doing all these things. So there's somebody who is there looking at the entire organization and looking at the security posture, right? It could also be in the form of like your network ACLs. Are there security groups that are exposing, port 22 to, to the internet? There could just be one place where you can manage all those policies and make sure that, you have the right things. So compliance monitoring and remediation is one of the things you get. Obviously, unified dashboard for like your security posture, which is exactly what I mentioned, right? That's one of the reasons you must have something like this. Um, Single account is easy, but once you start dealing with organizations, it becomes a bit complex, and that's why you have like tools like this that you can manage it at just one, like in a single pane, right? So use case multi-account WAF deployment, for example, if you wanted like WAF to be associated with like a load balancer for every account, you can have that, right? So consistent security group policies, you can also have that. Compliance reporting, it's easy for you to see at a glance, all your compliance, if you are meeting it or you're not. And then you can have automated remediation if you actually want to follow that path, right? Cool. So that brings me to one of my favorite topics, which is KMS, right? If you think about it in AWS, there is really a lot of services that you have to do, right? The thing is that sometimes, I think we've talked about encryption at some point, right? But it's something you're going to deal with, whether you're dealing with databases, you're dealing with storage. But the whole idea is that when you store things in an EBS volume, right? Sometimes you are scared that somebody can get into the data that is in that EBS volume, right? Because it's in the cloud. Some people say, oh, the cloud is not as secure. But these are measures you can put in place whereby you're saying, I know my data is in EBS in AWS, but is encrypted such that if you get access to that EBS volume, you won't be able to get the data that is there, and right? And that's where KMS comes in. This is me using EBS as an example, but for many of the services in AWS, there is really encryption, for most of the service you'll be dealing with, right? And it's a best practice. You have to enable encryption. Sometimes you're talking about encryption at rest, meaning where the data is residing, or in transit, right? When the data is moving. So when you think about it, there is like you can use the AWS manage KMS, right? So you can use AWS basically as your own manage, like I think I've also mentioned that many of the solutions AWS offer, you can bring in your own for in many cases, right? So this is also one case where you can use AWS KMS to do your need, but you can also more or less like use an HSM, right? An hardware security module that you can deploy on the AWS account, in your AWS account as a cluster to manage your security need if you actually want to maybe fill in some compliance needs, right? And you don't want to use the AWS own KMS, right? Obviously, integration. We've seen many places they'll ask if you want KMS or not KMS and all that. So um, and then you can see auditing, right? You can, what it means is that you can also use policies to control who has access, who can decrypt or who can encrypt, all that within your account, right? So centralized key management. I think at some points I'm going to, if I probably will help you understand what KMS is in details, right? Because here you're seeing a KMS key, you're seeing a data key, and then you're seeing data. But there's something that is called the envelope encryption that happens in there, right? So where like a KMS key itself will generate a data key, and then that data key itself is what you can basically use to now encrypt your data. But again, you can also, yeah, it's something I don't want to go in depth right now because it's going to be hard to cover it like in a call. So just know that for every of the services you deal with in AWS, there's like you can do more or less like encryption, just using KMS, right, to make sure. So if you think about it, you can have managed keys, right? You can have AWS managed keys, meaning keys that just works for depending on the service that you're using. You can also have your own managed keys that you create in the AWS account. Um, so and then you can also have so managed keys can be from AWS. You can have your own custom, like more or less like your own managed keys that you create, right, in the account. And then one good thing that is there is that you can have key rotation if you wanted. Like I mentioned in the past slide, there's like fine-grained access control if you wanted. We've seen how CloudTrail can also help with that, right? You can see audits, who is doing what and what they're doing at the given time, right? Obviously, some cost is associated if you really want to use keys in AWS. If you want to use like KMS in AWS, there's cost associated with it. So before we talk about CloudHSM, let's just go into the account. Let's see if this guy has been deleted. Let's go and refresh. Uh, yeah, so it's gone. I don't have any firewall again. So what it means is that I can go back to my subnet. I think this video will be longer than I expected. Maybe I'll just cut it into two. I really want us to go through this slide. I don't want us to prolong it, so I'll just go through it. So this is the private. So I'm going to go back to the subnet. So it's let's go back to the route tables. We're trying to delete one of those route tables and we couldn't, right? So it's the firewall subnet we want, the route table we wanted to. Yeah, it still has an association. So we'll go back to the subnet. So we'll go back to the firewall subnet, and this is the one we're trying to delete. So I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm just going to do delete. I think now it's showing green, meaning it's good to go. So I'll delete it. And then I'll go to the route tables. I'll delete the firewall route table. We don't have a firewall again. I'm going to delete it, right? I think in this case, it's still saying has association. Maybe it's just like something I need to refresh. But if I try it again this time, I think it should be able to go. Yeah, I think we're good to go now. So delete. So it's gone. And then what we can basically do is that we can also go to our subnet. EC2 instance, I think I can, if I refresh this, is this still here? Yeah, this is obviously gone. This is like the interface that was created by the firewall. It's gone. So I'm going to delete this one. I'm just going to delete this instance state. I'm going to terminate this one. So when I terminate it, I'm just doing some cleanup, right? Just to make sure we see some of the things we also created as part of the process. So I'm deleting this. So what it means is that we can now go back to our route tables. I'm just going to give this EC2 instance time to terminate. Once it's terminated, I'm going to delete the private subnet and the route table, yes, associated with it. And if you remember, I also created a NAT gateway, right? I didn't create it on the call because we've gone through NAT gateway before. But let me see in this private route table. Let me see the. I don't know if this is. I think I've removed it before though. I don't know why it's still showing, but let me just get rid of it. So private route. Cool. So it means that we can actually get rid of our NAT gateway. So let me go back to my NAT gateway. Where is it? NAT gateway, because NAT gateways obviously are not free. So I'm going to get rid of it. Delete NAT gateway. I'm going to get rid of it. So it's gone. So now that is being deleted, I'm now going to go back to my subnets. So I'm going to go to my subnet first. I'll try and delete this. Let me see if this is going to allow me to delete. I think, yeah, it's allowing me. So I'm just going to delete this one. And then go back to my route tables. Is there like a private route tables? Yeah, there is one. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So I think it says, yeah, I think I just need to refresh and then try to get rid of it this time. So delete it again, and then okay, good. So we're back to more or less like the default VPC. That's what we've done. So we've cleaned every other thing we added. Remember, we created like a private subnet, a firewall subnet. We did all the integration, but now we're back to the basic VPC that comes with an AWS account, the basic subnet, and we've gotten rid of the things that will cost us money. So elastic IPs, there is still one that is here. It looks like after getting rid of the NAT gateway, why is it? It's showing deleted, but the elastic IP is still there. But let me just get rid of it because if you keep an elastic IP there, release elastic IP, I'm just going to release it. I'm adding this to the video so that somebody will not say, oh, I left something running and it's causing, yeah, so it's gone. The NAT gateway is also gone. Cool. So that's it, basically, that's it. So we're talking about KMS. So let's just go into KMS. It's like, key management service from AWS. And yeah, basically. And if you, I think we've created a number of EBS volumes at some point, right? So if you do EBS, for example, let's say we go to EC2, I think that's where EBS is, right? So we can go to EBS, we can go to volumes. If you want to create a volume, for example, right? So let's call it GP3 in this case. Let's give it just 10 GB, right? So we can give it 10 GB, whatever. These are like the defaults. It's not a big deal. US West 2A. But you can see there is an option, right, to encrypt the volume. And what it means is that a lot of the services, this is where the integration also comes in. A lot of the services in AWS will give you room for you to use a sort of encryption, right? So in this case, we'll say encrypt. There is like the default, right? So when you think about it, it's really, in this case, we're using like the default EBS volume, right? Sorry, EBS encryption, which comes from AWS. So for example, if you go to key management and you do AWS manage keys, you see a bunch of them, right? So you see AWS EBS, SNS, S3, secrets manager, right? So we're using this in this case, right? So we're just going to go back there and say create volume, right? So what it just means is that um, we have volumes now, a particular volume that we created. Let's refresh and see. So there's a volume. It's obviously encrypted. In your account, usually you'll be warned if some things are meant to be encrypted, but you're leaving it not encrypted. So in this case, we've encrypted it. But another thing we can also do, so at this point, that volume is encrypted. So even if you get access to the volume, the data inside is encrypted, which is what we want, right? So I'm going to now pretty much just delete this, right? So delete the volume. You should know that volumes can live outside of the life cycle of EC2 machines, right? EC2 instances. So it's gone. But what we can also do, we can create our own managed key. So there's like AWS manage. We can also create our own managed key. Um, so we can do, yeah, we can do symmetric. We can do KMS. I think, yeah, we're using obviously KMS in this case, single region. You can have multi-region keys. Just say my EBS, maybe call it my EBS or my, let me say my KMS key. I think that's like a better name to call it. So I'll just call it my KMS key, KMS, KMS key, right? So what it means is that you can do that. You can do next. Yeah, you probably would, need like a, what do you call it? Um, like a key administrator, right? Somebody who can administer the key. So I'm just going to go with the basic. Um, in this case, I don't really need to define any usage permission for now. It's there. Brainyl is the administrator. I'm going to do next, and then I'm going to finish, right? So what it means is that I have my own managed key in this case. What it means is that if I go back to the volume that I was creating before, I was using AWS managed key, but I can also create a volume again and try to use my own managed key, right? Maybe you want to manage, like instead of using AWS one, you can. So I will encrypt. I would say use my KMS key, right? So in this case, because I'm managing it, I can also choose who can decrypt, who cannot decrypt, who can use it to decrypt data, and all that. But why not? I can also create a volume, 10 GB, and then I can do create volume, and it's going to be using my key. So if you see it, it's obviously creating, it's encrypted, it's using this my KMS key alias. But there is more to KMS, okay? But this is like a friendly introduction that you can create yours, and you can also use um, what do you call it, AWS managed keys to do that, okay? So with that said, let's continue. So here I'm just going to get rid of the volume. I don't need it because I'm not using it now. So I'm going to get rid of it. And then I'm also going to go back to my key. They cost money if you leave them running. So I'm just going to delete it. Pretty much I want to disable this key, And then what else do I want to do with it? I think, yeah, that's it. Delete current key. Let's see. Let's give it time. I think I've disabled it already. My KMS key, I just now need to more or less like what? Disable. I have disabled it, right? So it's disabled. Yeah, I actually want to delete it completely, right? So I don't know why the key is not showing. Maybe who knows whether the volume is still being associated. But that's it in a nutshell. I'll come back to it and pretty much make sure I clean it up. Okay. So what if you have like your own strong requirement? That's where HSM comes in, right? You can do like your own manage, more or less like your own like if you wanted to take like the security to another level, right? You don't want to use AWS offerings, right? Because if you think about it, even your customer managed key is still being managed by KMS, right? AWS KMS. But if you wanted to more or less like take that out of the loop completely, that's where Cloud HSM comes in, right? You can use Cloud HSM, and that's like a cluster you create on in the AWS account. It's obviously it will require you to manage it. It has some complexity also involved in there, right? Setting it up and making sure it's doing what you want. But again, it will give you all the benefit that AWS KMS still gives you, right? But this is you more or less like, especially if you have like high compliance need, right? Where you want to be more in control, right? And if you think about how we've looked at all the other services, you see that there's sometimes you can take more control, sometimes you can hand control over to AWS. So these options are always there for you to choose from, right? So you can obviously I think I did mention like three use case there. You can offload like your SSL, your TLS processing for your web server to your Cloud HSM. You can protect your private keys for certificate authorities like your CAs. Um, and then if you wanted to do enable transparent data encryption for Oracle, you can use your Cloud HSM to achieve that easily, right? Um, when will you choose it? Most people use AWS KMS for the most part. So when there is like a strong, regulatory compliance, and that has to like more or less like go through that your own flow, it's a good use case for Cloud HSM. If you also have like custom key management applications that you have, it's also a good use case. And then if you are actually looking for performance around, cryptographic, you have like high performance cryptographic requirements. That's also one of the reasons you would use it, right? Cloud HSM is obviously something that is advanced. It's not something you would do at beginner level, right? But yeah, there are situations where you need it. There is a solution, and you can obviously tie into AWS solution. Here, I'm not going to talk much about Secrets Manager because we've already talked about it at a different class. But you know that you can create secrets for your databases and whatever. Like a lot of the services in AWS, you can actually use Secrets Manager to create secrets to manage them, right? I think I did a class about it, so I'm not going to stress on it on this class. Okay. Um, so let's not talk about GuardDuty. I think when you look at the security modules that we're going through, what confuses people at the end of the day is just that there is so many services, and sometimes people cannot differentiate what is one service doing and the other service is not doing, right? I think that's the only challenge I've seen when you're dealing with security, because you'll be like, there's inspector, there is GuardDuty, there is network firewall, there's firewall manager, but the truth is that they all have their uses, right? They all do. You just need to understand them, know where they come in, right? We've seen that manage AWS the firewall manager, for example, it's like governance, like you're using that to govern security adoption within your organization, right? But again, it has to be used around AWS organization. But your firewall, I just use firewall. I didn't need to have AWS organization, right? But when you now think about GuardDuty is machine learning based threat detection. And the whole idea is that as time goes on, right, things will be happening. We've seen CloudTrail. CloudTrail it tells you who did what in your account, right? Your VPC flow log that we saw that is related to networking and firewall and everything, you see that it tells you who gained access. It has record of the person's source, like the source IP address, the source port. Where did it, which service, which port did it reach, which IP address did it reach. So there's like deny, allow to tell you if it was allowed or it was denied, right? So if those information are in the logs, and then there's like a CloudTrail event, right? And there's like your EKS audit logs, for example. EKS is obviously a big subject, but there's like your audit log. The whole idea is that if you want to tell if someone from a known, like a reputable IP address that is known for being malicious access your application, your EKS, how will you know? You can. If you have like a process in place, you can. But that's where GuardDuty comes in, because basically it can look at all this and it can tell you that, oh, we suspect something has gone, like we suspect there's a threat, right? Because we know this IP to be malicious, and from the logs, from the CloudTrail event, it looks like this person was able to access your something inside EKS because he knows that this is your IP address and this is the port, or for example, right? Because he's looking at the logs, he's looking at the CloudTrail events, right? So and he can mirror all these things and with the help of machine learning tell you if there was like if he detected a threat, right? So continuous monitoring of your AWS account and your workload. Like I mentioned, DNS, your DNS logs, your VPC flow logs, your CloudTrail, you can see all that. Remember CloudTrail, you can aggregate the information somewhere, right? And you can actually be putting an eye on that and tell you if someone, imagine someone from a unknown IP address, like or a malicious IP address, actually made an API call to one of your service, right? GuardDuty can actually detect that from you for you, right? And you can also do threat intelligence feeds from AWS and third parties, right? So it's there in the middle, it's doing machine learning, threat intelligence, continuous learning is looking at your system, and then obviously it's giving you actionable insights that you can use, right? And like all these things are tools, but you can build automation around it, right? You can now say, okay, if something is detected, what do you want to do? We've seen how we can use Event Bridge to listen to some of these events, and then do you want to send someone a notification? Or do you want to more or less like send message to a Slack channel, right? There's so many things you can basically do, okay? So that's GuardDuty in a nutshell. The fact that it's one place that is looking at so many, like it's looking at these services, the data sources on the left, and it's intelligently able to tell you if you are under attack or if someone got into your account in a malicious way, right? So you can find that. Remember, it's different from Inspector. Inspector will look at container. What are the packages that is on the container? Is there something wrong with the versions of the packages that you're using? Or is your EC2 machine using an operating system that has some vulnerabilities? Or is your Lambda function running a code? Inspector is different, right? But in the case of GuardDuty, is really looking at logs is something you should pay attention. It's looking at some of your logs and some of your CloudTrail events, okay? So let's continue. So when you think about it, obviously it will tell you about things like instance compromise. So if someone is doing if there's like a backdoor, this is there's a backdoor, even when you run like containers using privileged access, GuardDuty can report that because it knows when you do all those commands. Why? Because it's looking at your EKS logs and is able to extract that information from there. If someone is using your account for cryptocurrency mining, if you don't care, if you have a process in place to do that, it obviously will be cumbersome, but GuardDuty can basically do it for you easily. So, and then if your account has been compromised, because it's looking at CloudTrail, is seeing if somebody logged in from a malicious IP address or the person is overdoing things, right? It can flag patterns that are well known, right? Also, bucket compromise. So S3, if something is fishy about how your S3 is being used, so you don't need to provision any infrastructure. 30-day free trial if you want to more or less like do some. And then security hub is something we also see, right? But again, people also confuse security hub, but GuardDuty can feed security hub, right? Hub is like a hub. I will explain what that is, but GuardDuty is like it's more or less like a collection point that can feed to security hub, where in one place you can now see the things that are coming from your different security measures that you have, right? So that's really GuardDuty. You set it up, and it does its thing, and it reports back to you, and then you choose what you want to do. Remember, these things are just you're trying to make sure you intercept before it becomes too bad, right? So that's what it's all about. So if you think about it, data source, CloudTrail logs, DNS logs, VPC flow logs, we've seen to some extent some of these things. We've seen CloudTrail event logs, we've seen VPC flow logs, DNS logs. We've not really seen what a DNS log is, right? But DNS log is basically when you make like a DNS request, you can actually see all that also, right? So, and then you can obviously take that findings and put like event bridge, put SNS. We've seen event bridge, we've used it. We've seen SNS, we've used it, and then you can pipe that out to security hub, right? And then you can also do like when you're dealing with AWS organization, you can have that being part of you can even delegate like an account that does many of the one place where you can see everything, right? So you like doing centralized findings within your account. Okay. That brings us to Macie. So like I said, there's so many services, right? You just need to know what each service is doing, right? And as you interact with them, sometimes it's hard to show them on the call. And this is where we're trying to see all the services that we have, where each one is playing a role. The other one we saw when we were looking at network firewall is really traffic within your VPC, right? We just talked about what do you call it now? We just talked about GuardDuty is looking at your logs, looking at your events, your CloudTrail events. But there's also Macie, and Macie, whenever you hear Macie, is S3 buckets, right? Macie does not do any other thing outside S3. So just think about a security solution that is well tailored to help you. Because again, some people will be like, why S3? Because in the real world, if you check my account, I probably have like one bucket or two buckets. But in the real world, you have so many buckets, and these buckets are created by different people, right? So sometimes you really want to see if your buckets are compliant, so it's like a machine learning powered data classification service that you can apply to your S3, right? So it does like S3 objects, S3 bucket and object analysis for sensitive data, especially. So if you wanted to do more or less like PII, you want to identify when there's like a PII, like so personal identifiable information in any of your buckets, Macie is going to track that for you. Okay. So if you look at the classifications that we have, if you can track for credit card, for passport numbers, whatever you want to track. You can even have your own custom identifier that tells you, if I see this pattern, then please let me know. So right, but please remember, Macie is S3. So whenever you see anything or you are dealing, even if you in your dealings, if you want to ever try Macie, it's obviously going to tell you the status of things based on S3, nothing more. It's not going to go and be checking your VPC logs, right? And that's why I said for security, there'll be so many security entities that you see. So I think the confusion is always which is for what, right? And which is what I'm trying here to explain also to you, right? You can also do content-based classification, data. You can even do data sampling also if you wanted, right? So compliance is really one of the reasons you take security, because people build different kind of applications. Sometimes you want to follow a particular standard, right? And in some cases, they pay attention to like having someone's personal information exposed, right? So you don't want that to be in an S3 bucket, maybe just there as is. In some applications, maybe they don't pay that much attention, but it depends on what you're building. Some people are building financial apps. Some people are building applications that pay so much attention to like what do you call it to like personal information, right? So Macie does a good job at that, but specifically for S3. Okay. You can also see security findings like public bucket exposure. You know what that means, right? If your public bucket is exposed publicly, somebody can pretty much just use it and load stuff, and you'll be charged, right? Encryption status, all this is basically tied to the bucket, right? So access control issues also, if there's overly permissive policies in your bucket, it can help you do that, obviously, like I said, many of these security tools can pull, they can push information to Security Hub, right? Security Hub is what I always like people not to confuse. A hub is like a hub, just a centralized place to see things, right? And many things can feed to it. So Macie is also one of those things that can feed. Event bridge, obviously you can do, whenever you hear event bridge, just know that Macie is an AWS service, right? Sometimes it can discover an event. And because of that, you can use event bridge to listen to that event and react, right? Your reaction can be, it depends. I don't know, whatever you want to react, whether you want to send notification or you want to immediately put in a policy that will block that access from the bucket. Automation is your, like whatever you want to automate, but these patterns are all there, right? And then you can also see CloudWatch metrics. And that brings us to like a very interesting service in AWS. Sometimes, like I said, people usually just confuse this. If you can know exactly when to use each service, a lot of them will also come from usage, right? As you use them, you just get comfortable. You know what each one is doing, right? Because when you have so many security solutions, you'll not be like, which is doing what? But it's not hard. Security Hub is basically, it's just centralized, right? Central security findings. So think about it as a place to, aggregate all things that are happening. Because if you had to be dealing with, you go to GuardDuty, you're dealing with it on its own. Inspector, you're doing it on its own. You're moving through these services differently. Sometimes it can be a burden, and that's why Security Hub is just like a hub. So just don't forget, it's like a hub. You're aggregating all these security findings from the different services. So instead of looking at the services individually, you can actually stay in Security Hub and you can filter findings based on where they are coming from, right? So if you're interested in inspector findings, you can't see them. You can see the ones that are coming from inspector and what they are, right? So multi-service integration is obviously what you find. Like I said, GuardDuty, Inspector, Macie. You can even, have something from. You've seen how AWS Config tool is also like a huge tool, right? That you can get right? You've seen how AWS config is also like a tool, right, that you can use for even understanding your security posture, right? How your configurations are changing over time. All that kind of information you can get it from what do you call it? You can also get it from Security Hub, right? So many of these things, honestly, they make more sense when you begin to have like a lot of data in your account and you begin to see actually you see like it's always nice. I think for us here on this call, we still have one account we are just using, trying to explore, trying to grow. But again, in the real world, as you grow, you find out that yeah, you're dealing with so many accounts, so many buckets, so many EBS volumes, so many EC2 machines, and usually the problem is always where is that one place that I can sit and tell the security posture of my organization, right? You would not expect if you're a security engineer to be going from one account to account to find information. That's why there's like a hub, right? So on a hub can help you do all those gatherings together, right? So security posture dashboard, I think I've said that so many times now. You can also do prioritization, right? Obviously every finding will come with a severity to tell you if it's high, if it's medium, you know. Custom insights, meaning you can do filterings, right? You can filter based on, you can be saying, in this case, I'm only looking for the things that are happening from inspector. And then obviously compliance standards also. You can see how you're meeting up some of your compliance standards, right? Many of these things you will continue to, and then workflow integration, yes, in as much as there's like an event bridge to capture when something goes wrong, you can always pipe that to anywhere you want to pipe it, right? SNS, if you wanted real-time alerting if something goes wrong, Lambda functions, if you wanted to do custom remediation logic, and then if you wanted to like pipe to Jira or ServiceNow, whatever you want to. The thing is that yeah, all these things are just you know what you want, and then you can build automation around it, right? That's really what we try to solve in this world called cloud engineering or DevOps engineering, right? There are tools, but sometimes what you make of the tool is what makes you. There's a tool, right? But sometimes we now build like monitoring, automation, around these tools, and that's what makes your system it kind of look like it functions on its own, right? Because you know that if something goes wrong now, you can be notified immediately that there is like a security breach, and someone will have to do the right thing, right? What's the benefit? Centralized management. You don't need to be stressed moving from one account to the other, and then compliance reporting, right? If you wanted to report based on compliance, where you stand, it's very easy for you to just go there and see where you stand based on your compliance, right? Artifact is obviously straightforward. It's straightforward in AWS. So on-demand access to AWS compliance documentation. That one is easy, right? Remember, for some of the other services, we are trying to use those services to gauge how compliant our services are, right? But sometimes you also want to gauge the compliance of the person who is hosting you. In this case, your host, AWS, right? So Artifact is really where you can go and see, AWS compliance documentation, right? So self-service portal, meaning you don't need to, you can just go. I think I'll try to, once I'm done with this slide, I'll go into the account to try to see what Artifact looks like. No additional cost. I mean, do you have to pay to get compliance documentation from AWS? You don't have to, right? So regular updates as certifications are renewed. Trust me, it depends on your organization, but every organization that is in the cloud, there is like compliance need they need to make, right? And sometimes it involves going through your security findings, going through this, fixing them, and then this is really where DevSecOps shines, right? You hear people say DevSecOps. The whole idea is that as you are getting all these findings from Security Hub, Macie, all that, you are implementing them to meet a particular, because for example, if your industry is financially focused, there are some things you have to pass for them to give you that, to say, okay, yeah, you're certified to handle financial information, right? It's the same way with AWS, right? People want to, I'm putting my entire organization in your hands. They want to also be able to get to see that AWS is compliant, which is what Artifact does, right? There's nothing serious. There's nothing much. So you can get SOC reports, PCI DSS documentation, ISO certifications, HIPAA, FedRAMP documentation, and all that. So it's not. Let's see if we can find that one. So if I type Artifact, let's see Artifact. So you can see code Artifact, right? I think we've talked about code Artifact before, right? So npm install or pi blah blah blah. If you wanted to have your own artifact, right? Code Artifact, where you keep code, right? Keep different versions of code. That's where code Artifact is. But AWS Artifact is different, right? So that's why I said sometimes when you've had so many services, sometimes it becomes very, but if you understand them, using some of the way they are also named, it can be easy, right? So I'm not going to code artifact. I did type code artifact, but two came. There's code artifact, there's also AWS artifact. So in this case, I'm going to go to AWS artifact. So what it means is that, yeah, you can just go there and, yeah, search for, you can view reports, right? So there are a lot of them here, a lot of them. That's just all it's about. So you can actually go and find, things. So accessibility, conformance reports. You can find. See, you can see like 381 of them. So let's even search for. I'm not sure if. Yeah, let me see FedRAMP for something, right? So you can see, for example, there is like a reference architecture white paper for FedRAMP. All these kind of documents are, that's basically what it is. If you are interested in knowing, going further to see like if the cloud is compliant with a particular standards that you're following, and you can go here and request for those documents, right? So I can click this. I'm not paying. I can just download the report to see. Cool. I think that is it. There is nothing much to say in there. But again, it can come up in if you're ever writing any of these early exams in AWS certification. Sometimes they'll ask you if you want compliance documents, blah blah blah. Which service do you go to get it, right? That's AWS Artifact, right? So global compliance industry, if you multiple international standard like we've seen, regional compliance, there is also that. Usually this comes into play when you're doing audits, right? Audit preparation. In the world of cloud, or in the world of cloud, basically, there is times you have to do audit, right? And audit is what is going to be checking to see if you pass this standard or not, right? So around that time, these documents become very, very handy, right? Due diligence, vendor assessment process, if you wanted, and then compliance gap analysis, right? If you were trying to see what are the gaps that do exist in there. Cool. I think we've gone through a lot of service in this series, right? And this is where I'm going to be talking about some of the security best practice, and some of them are from my experience, basically from the things that I've seen by having worked in the cloud for for quite a while now. I can obviously tell you some of the things that I've seen that you have to take note of from day one. So we're almost at the end of the slide, but I just need to mention some of the security best practices you need to take, right? We've seen privilege, principle of least privilege, right? That's like a must, because if you notice how these services are, they all have like a role, access key policy. There's something that basically will tell you the permission that it has, right? And it's the same. It means that you have to make sure it is. Sometimes we use full access, but that's like for demo. In the real world, you have to specify, make sure if something is only listing a bucket, let it list buckets, and that's it. If something is going to fetch data from S3, let it only be able to fetch data. Don't give it more than the permission that it needs, right? Again, please, something I also have seen, I've done a lot on is also IAM roles. It's usually de facto, right? So in organizations, most times it's discouraged for you to like give people access credentials, right? It's not good. IAM roles are better. You assume them, you do stuff, and then you know that you're not keeping keys lying down. Because yeah, in this world that we are now with AI, AI coding and all that, you won't know when your API, your access, your credentials can sneak into your source code and someone else will have it, right? So you want to prevent that. And then for very privileged accounts or privileged processes, you need to enable MFA, right? MFA is good. Multi-factor means if you have to delete this sensitive bucket, maybe you need like an MFA. You need to activate, you need to confirm using like a multi-factor for us to know that, and that MFA is probably limited to some people that can only do that kind of action, right? So, and then you can always regularly do reviews of your security posture. That's the whole idea of going through all these service, looking at Macie, looking at Security Hub, because you have to continuously look at them to tell how compliant or how secure your platform is, right? And that sometimes it depends on the regulation you're following. You need to go through that compliance, right? We've seen how KMS can help. We didn't really go. There is more to talk about KMS, but just at a glance, you can see how you don't have any excuse for you to just create an EBS volume and don't have it encrypted, right? It has to be encrypted. Many of the things you create, you can create encryption around it. You can also encrypt data in transit, right? Means when the data is moving, SSL and TLSL. We've also seen how ACM can help to do that, right? You can use AWS Certificate Manager to basically issue SSL and TSL certificate. That makes certificate issuing easy. So what's your excuse of not using them? Putting your load balancers or your different kind of services behind a TLS or SSL certificate, right? Secret manager is something you have to prioritize. If something is a secret, don't put it anywhere. keep it in a secret manager, right? Um, and then obviously data classification and handling procedures, meaning yeah, you can classify some data and say this can somebody can see this set of people cannot see, right? And that's where you can do some further segregation, right? Um, so we talked about identity and access management, data protection, and then here I'm talking about network security. We've seen all the security, we've seen it. Trust me, we've not really, like I said, that's why there's like a certification for security. So don't expect me that in a 1 hour call I'm going to tell you everything about security in AWS, right? But I'm happy we've gone through like a series trying to just identify some of the things why we need them, right? What I'm trying to mention is that different layers exist. It just depends on how much of the layers you want to use. Sometimes you want to use so many layers. Sometimes you want to use few layers. But I think we've seen the layers, right? Security groups, it's like a firewall at the EC2 instance level. We've seen that even in a subnet, you can block everything. You can decide how traffic is moving, right, at a subnet level, right? But even within a VPC, you can also now put a firewall to be like, okay, don't worry, whatever you put inside of your subnet or your security group, I still decide who goes out or who comes in, right? Even at that administrative level, because remember, in the real world, sometimes you have like a centralized networking account, such that all traffic from the workload account will go through that centralized account, and in there you can have like network firewalls in place that can actually block traffic or allow traffic, right? So WAF is obviously there for your web applications if you want that. And then regular security assessment, you can do that with Inspector, right? So your EC2, Lambda functions, your, what do you call it, your ECR repo, right? So to check the containers that are pushed, if they have like vulnerability attached with them, you can also say, okay, if there's a vulnerability attached to it and it's something that is very critical, please, it cannot make it to production. Those can be policies that you have in place, right? Monitoring and logging, you can't joke with that, right? So applications, sometimes, as an application developer, there's sometimes you're logging things, right? Just to tell you what's happening. That's how it is also in networking. Sometimes your database, you have to log information. Sometimes your queues, you need to log information. Sometimes you basically just need to keep information. Sometimes it helps you to tell about the status of your infra, and it can also inform you, who is gaining access to what, right? GuardDuty, we've seen what that is, right? How you can aggregate many logs from different places, and it can help you do threat detection by using machine learning. Centralized logging is something, because at the end of the day, you might have multiple accounts, and many of those accounts will be keeping logs. Sometimes it's good you centralize it, so you bring it to one location so that it's easy for you to analyze, find things from those logs, right? Whether it's CloudWatch you're picking as a tool. For me, I like my logs to be in CloudWatch. I know some services will send to S3, but you have to find a way to bring them to CloudWatch so it's easy for you to, because S3 is not really very, I know with Athena it's easy for you to filter and do stuff, but CloudWatch makes it easy at a different level entirely. So it depends on what you choose. If you want to use S3, you can centralize everything to S3, even from CloudWatch, or you can use CloudWatch and centralize even the ones that are in S3 back to CloudWatch, such that in one place you can tell what is happening, right? You don't have to go to many places. And you can even centralize from different accounts to one aggregated account. And you just know that you don't have to visit all the accounts to find out what is wrong, right? Security alerts, automated responses. You don't need to wait till it happens and somebody tells you. We've talked about being proactive and being reactive, right? Reactive is you are reacting, something has happened. But being proactive is that you've set alerts in place. When it happens, you are notified and immediately you can take action, right? Cool. Um, Honestly, this is like one of the longest modules, but I had to finish it today because I didn't want to go back to the security module again. So, yeah. But again, if you think about some of the things we've talked about, shared responsibility model, we did look at shared responsibility model, what you are responsible for, what AWS is responsible for. We talked about the security services, and I said, as much as we've talked about so many of them, I think one of the challenge for people who are just starting their cloud journey is always, what is what for, right? What is this service like? Macie, always for S3, right? GuardDuty is looking at some of your logs, trying to see if there is like some malicious activity happening in there, right? So instead of you doing it yourself, you could create a process that does it for you. But I mean, there's a tool that can help you. And Inspector, very good at looking at your containers, your EC2 machines, or your Lambda functions to see if there's vulnerability attached to maybe the package they're installing or the OS that is being used, right? So, and then we looked at compliance and the things that helps us do compliance. We did config, right? We did config. Config does that because we can see when a bucket, for example, if you don't support bucket not being versioned, or you don't support buckets being there and not having S3 encryption, you can have those config rules that are checking, and in one place you can just see the buckets that are compliant versus the ones that are non-compliant, right? And you saw how we could auto remediate, right? Meaning you find it, you resolve it without having to wait, right? And then security hub, anytime you hear security hub, it's not something that is doing something like on it's basically a hub to aggregate all the findings that are from these other places, just so that you have like a centralized view for where you're seeing things, right? Artifacts, obviously you can access AWS compliance status, right? In AWS you can do that. Data protection, KMS, if you wanted AWS own solution, you can roll out Cloud HSM, but there's some work involved for you to have that. So maybe in the question, you're looking at like a more or less there is like question to say you wanted to deploy your own custom security module. Definitely, you know that it's not KMS, because KMS is managed by AWS, right? So that's Cloud HSM that will work in that kind of place. But you can also experiment further. Certificates, you will see certificates, anything public endpoints. If you want to release your public domains at the end of the day, you will use HTTPS, right? ACM makes it easy. And we saw that you can do public certificates, which are free. You can also issue private certificates, right? Private certificate, basically for resources that are not meant to be on the internet, but they obviously cost money, just so you know. Secret management for secure, anything that is credential related, whether it's your database, whether it's your API tokens, your GitHub access tokens, all that can be stored in Secret Manager, and it supports rotation. You can actually do rotation around it, right? You can even have a schedule to say every after this period, please rotate this secret, right? If you have a good process around it, it means that even if somebody grabs a secret after a while, it's not going to work, right? Instead of having secrets that are for a lifetime, such that if somebody has it, if they have it already. Cool. What else? That's it. That's the summary.